gonna like cry my ass off during this whole thing, I know it. So, I mean, I love that guy. Thank you, Joel, for that wonderful introduction. I'm Eric Jackson, and I'm so excited to be here today. And thank you for sharing that moment of stuttering with me. I mean, it was fake for me, but I have to tell you something. It's not really about the stuttering so much, right? Stuttering is about that kind of interaction, the uncomfortability that we feel, that other people who stutter feel when we're in a block like that. And to be able to do that is a nice thing. I'm going to talk a lot about that today. But thank you for sharing that moment with me. So I'm so honored to be doing this. It really is a dream of mine to be able to give the keynote at Friends. It's a little bittersweet because Lee's not here. I think most people in this room probably know Lee, right? She was an amazing person. And obviously, she was like the lifeblood of this organization for so long. This keynote has given me the chance really to think about and reflect on my experience with stuttering over the years. I'm 45. I've been stuttering for a long time. And when I was thinking about, like, okay, well, what should this speech be about? I planned this whole talk. So I'm an academic. I'm a professor. I'm a researcher. I'm a speech pathologist. So I think it's important to have a planned, structured talk sometimes. So I planned this whole talk out. I mean, it wasn't that good, but it was okay. It was pretty good, I thought. And like something about it wasn't really feeling right to me. So I was going back and forth, and then I called a couple people. I called Karen, too, and I said, Karen, like, I'm not really sure about what I'm going to do for the keynote. And Karen, so what I asked Karen was like, what do you think people want to hear? I'm like, what do you think the kids who are going to be there want to hear? What do you think the young adults want to hear? What do you think the parents want to hear? I don't care about anybody else. No, I'm just kidding. What do you think the speech pathologists want to hear? Fine. And Karen goes, it was great. She goes, I don't really think it matters what you say. That was exactly what she said, and I was like, okay, well. I was like, well, so that makes things easy. So I sort of wrestled with it. I went back and forth, and then I came to the decision that, yeah, I'm going to throw this speech away, which wasn't that good anyway, and I'm just going to wing it. And I'm just going to do it. So what I'm going to do is briefly, how much time do I have?
An hour? 45 minutes?
Okay. I'm going to take a cue from Trump. I'm going to go an hour and a half. That's the last thing I'm going to say about anything political. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with stuttering and how much it shaped me, and then how I started to change how I thought about stuttering. I'm going to try to keep it brief and leave a lot of time for questions at the end, because that's going to make things much easier. I want to talk about what people want to talk about in this room. So, people often ask me, what was your first memory of stuttering? In settings like this, when I'm talking about stuttering. It would be weird if people just came up to you and asked you, what was your first memory? And what's so interesting about stuttering is that my first memory wasn't about stuttering necessarily, but it was about trying not to stutter. And it is, I was about 5 or 6, and it's etched in my brain. And I was in, I told the story before, just ignore it if you've heard it already, but maybe a lot of you have not heard it. I was in a class, and the teacher asked a question, and it was, what is it called when a bunch of people sing together at the same time? And nobody knew the answer. And I knew what the answer was, a chorus, right? Duh. That's what I was thinking at the time. See, nobody knows this? So I sort of wrestled for a little bit with, okay, well, should I raise my hand? And it's amazing because I remember this like it happened yesterday. And I chose not to raise my hand, and nobody else raised their hand. And then the teacher said the answer. And the reason that I didn't raise my hand was because a couple days, I mean, time is a little, it's 40 years ago. I think it was like a couple days or something. Just go with the story. So a couple days before that, a girl named Nadia, who I kind of liked, I was kind of sweet on, she called me a broken record in front of the class. And I mean, why should I risk that again? And the reason that I bring this story up is because that's what my experience of stuttering was like. I want to be clear that I'm talking about my experience today, but I do know that many people have had very similar experiences with stuttering, and your experience of stuttering is probably similar. But it sort of led to this childhood of feeling like I couldn't stutter, right? Which I internalized. And then it seemed like everything that I did past that was trying not to stutter. I was consumed, I thought about stuttering always, all day. Like, how could I sort of not be in a situation where I'm going to have to show this part of myself to somebody? Okay? I love my parents. My dad passed away last summer. Like 2 months before Lee. And I love my parents. They didn't really know what to do with a kid who stutters, right? I mean, they saw me, I was doing well in school, everything was fine, I played sports, I was okay. I did have some friends. But one of the things that I do remember is that sigh from my dad whenever I would get into a block. So he would sigh, right? Now, of course, I recognize that, well, like, he was frustrated. He wanted to help me, but he just didn't know how, right? However, the impact that had on me, I still hear that. Like it's still at 45, and all the work I've done on myself and my stuttering, it is still there, right? And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because this is what the experience of stuttering to me was, right? It was feeling bad about myself because I thought that I was doing something wrong, right? And it led me down this road of trying not to do that anymore, and a lot of avoidance. And I mean, there's so many, like I'm sure so many people in this room can identify with all the crazy things that we do to try to hide stuttering, right? Like I have a list of things one thing that I used to do was I hated the telephone, like many people do here. You younger people are lucky, like it's not really required so much anymore. But man, we had to call people, and that sucked. I had this like little tape recorder that I actually used for speech, right? When I needed to say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Okay, I'll get into that in a little bit. So what I would do, because I hated the phone so much, and it was that initial thing that I had to say on the phone, right? I would record, hi, it's Eric, can I speak to so-and-so, right? I'd record that into the tape machine, and then I'd put the phone, the receiver of the phone, next to the speaker of the tape machine, and then I'd hit play. And I thought it was genius. Until then what happened was whenever I had to start speaking, I would still block. And these avoidance things that we do are tricky like that, right? Sometimes in the moment they seem to work somehow, some way. Usually in the long run they kind of don't, right? And so I tried a whole bunch of things. My parents took me to speech therapy. There wasn't anything like Friends around back then, but I did go to lots of different speech therapists, and it wasn't helpful for me, okay? There was a time when I was late teens, early 20s, when I was in a real bad place, and I tried everything. Like I tried the Speech Easy, anybody know that? The thing you put in your ear? And that's supposed to be some kind of miracle cure? Yeah, okay. It's not. Interestingly, people can make the argument that it's based on science, which it in some ways is, but it doesn't help, and it doesn't work. I went to a chiropractic neurologist who was crazy. No, I shouldn't say she was crazy. She was well-intended. The idea there was also, what she argued, based on science, and in some ways it was. The idea was that, so stutterers, I study the brain, and stutterers show this kind of underactivation in our left hemisphere. Generally speaking, it's way more complicated than this, but I'm going to go with it. This underactivation in our left hemisphere of our brain in the frontal areas, and this overactivation in the right side of our brain. And her thinking was, I'm going to adjust the back so that we're going to balance out your neural activation during speech. That didn't work, unfortunately. But the thing about all of this therapy that I had was that there was always this idea that we're going to get you to be fluent, right? Even when people sort of started talking about, oh, you know, like thoughts and feelings are important too, it was still sort of the focus of stuttering therapy is how to not stutter anymore. I mean, it seems reasonable, actually, if you think about it, right? If you step back, okay, like this thing sucks, let's figure out a way to get rid of it. Problem is that we don't know how to. And this notion of fluency, right? Like back in the day, it was all about fluency. Now it's sort of like, okay, well, we have speech strategies for fluency, and then we also have tools to work on your attitudes and feelings. The thing is that we don't really know what is going to make somebody more fluent, okay? We don't have any ways to directly target making a person more fluent. So you're probably listening to yourself right now, going, yeah, but you kind of sound pretty fluent right now, right? You're speaking and not really having that much stuttering right now. I did used to stutter overtly a lot more. But what people didn't get was that at the core of this thing, it's really about how we are responding to stuttering and what we're doing, right? There are lots of things that we can do in order to become a more fluent speaker. We don't really know what they are, though. There are lots of things that seem to have this impact of making a person a more fluent speaker, but we don't really know what they are. We seem to do a lot of things that seem to somewhat help, okay? The point that I'm trying to make here is that what successful help was for me was learning not to hide from stuttering and learning not to run away from stuttering. And then magically in the end, that actually leads to more fluency. It's the most tricky thing about stuttering. It's like this paradox, right? Wait, but why, if I get comfortable stuttering, why is that going to help me be a more fluent speaker? And I gotta say, like, it's almost like fluency is a bad word sometimes, like it has this sort of thing, and then speech pathologists now are even telling parents, like, oh, like, don't think about fluency, Like, fluency would be fine. It would be a fine goal if we precisely know how to get there. We have some ideas, again, that may, in the long run, get to us. And this idea of learning to become comfortable with a moment of stuttering and learning to embrace a moment of stuttering, to me, is what we should be striving for. That's what speech pathologists should be telling us. That's what parents should be trying to encourage out of their children. So when I started to think differently about stuttering, right? When I started to say, oh, well, I don't really need to hide from this thing. I don't really need to run away. I don't really need to do all of the tricks that we do anymore. That's when speaking became much easier for me. And that's when it became even easier to use speaking strategies. Like, you'll hear me use some physical strategies in my speech, but when I was able not to be so afraid of stuttering, that's when it all became easier. It's almost like, in some ways, it's like a prerequisite. So how do we get there? Well, being here, to me, is one of the ways that we get there. And the support that's in this room right now makes getting there much easier, right? Finding people who you can talk about this experience with, and finding people who want to work on this sort of challenge of becoming more comfortable with stuttering can be super helpful, right? So Joel was up here before. Joel is one of these people, for me, that represents this idea of fearless stuttering, right? So he was talking about that internship. I was doing an internship, he was doing a stuttering therapy program, right? Well, one of my favorite memories was watching Joel. So we would go into the park and do these things called stuttering surveys, right? We'd come up with a bunch of questions like, what do you think causes stuttering? And do you think a teacher can be a person who stutters? And do you think a lawyer, whatever. And we'd go up to random people in the park and say, oh, hi, I'm Eric, I'm a person who stutters. Would you mind if I asked you a couple of questions about stuttering? And Joel one day went up to a bunch of construction workers. Like, if you could think of a group that would probably be the most difficult group of people to go up to and like try to be vulnerable. I'm not stereotyping here, but I kind of am, I suppose. It's like a group of New York City construction workers. And watching that is inspiring. Roisin, everybody knows Roisin in this room. to me, like, there's this whole thing, you know, people say like, oh, well, like, stutterers can't get some jobs, right? Like an air traffic controller. It's this weird thing that always comes up. It's like, well, no, if you stutter, you can't be an air traffic controller. I mean, I hear what you're saying, I guess. It doesn't make sense, but I do understand. Or like, you can't be a cop. But then you start meeting cops. And then you meet I've never met an air traffic controller who stutters. I'm sure there's one out there, though. And I think we found friends is net. No. So, to me, Roisin is an amazing example of fearless, open, what I like to call clean, but some people don't like this, stuttering. She was an emergency room nurse. Like, if you could be an emergency room nurse as a person who stutters, then you could be an air traffic controller, right? I mean, I think so. Karen, oh. So we were talking about Lee a lot on Wednesday, right? And that kind of no bullshit sort of approach to life. So, to me, you, Karen, embody Lee's attitude and spirit, but when it comes to stuttering, and I love it. You don't care.
Sometimes I care.
Right, but the important thing is that it looks like you don't care. Of course we care. You know, it's not easy to go up and be vulnerable in front of a person and stutter your ass off and be comfortable all the time with it, right? But you try to be, and that's what sort of gets you better. Sorry, gets you further along. No value judgments here. So I think of, I think of things that okay, well, like how do you get there? Like, how do you find the strength and maybe the courage to put yourself into these situations and be like so many amazing people in this room where instead of running away from stuttering, you start to think about approaching stuttering and moving towards stuttering, right? One way is to meet other people who stutter, like I said. Another way is to get involved. I see a lot of kids in this room. I love it. So what we did when we were younger was we started to advocate for people who stutter, right? We started podcasts, we started groups, we started leading groups, we started trying to get the message out there. That makes it easier for us to work on our own stuttering. And I think I think there's strength in numbers, is what I'm saying. I want to share one final story about Lee and fluency. I should have incorporated more rhymes into my talk. Yeah. I really hope it doesn't matter what I'm saying because I don't even know at this point. When I was, 25 or something, I was very involved in the stuttering community at that point. And I was at this workshop, right? And the workshop had fluency in the title. That's all I'm going to say. And the idea was to learn strategies to try to become fluent. And I knew it didn't make sense. At that point, I knew that, no, wait, this is the wrong focus, right? We shouldn't just throw this idea of fluency away necessarily, but there's a better way to try to get there. And there were people going up to the mic, and oh, I'm going to use my fluency techniques, I'm going to do all this. And that's cool. But the leaders of the workshop were emphasizing, make sure that when you leave here, you continue to practice your fluency techniques. And again, it didn't sit right with me. And I'm sitting there, I'm like stewing. Lee Caggiano was a great person to sit next to and stew. Just one sort of rabbit hole. I used to go to conferences with Lee, and she was amazing to sit next to. Because she'd like, this, bullshit. And then I'd be sitting there like, this bullshit. And then she'd ask a question, and it would be like, so what you just said was so interesting. Man, she was able to just sort of do both of those things like nobody I've ever met before in my life, and such an inspiration. But back to the workshop. I was, like, she saw I was stewing, and I didn't really know her that well at this point, right? And I was like, I'm going to go up there and say something. Like, I feel like there needs to be a message that goes out here, that it's not all about fluency. And Lee, looking in those eyes that were like lasers, she didn't even say anything. But I knew that she wanted me to go up there, and that was enough. So went up there, caused a little stir. But here's the thing, is that this organization is so important to me, and Lee's vision is so important to me. And Lee was such an advocate for trying to be a fearless stutterer. And yeah, we're not going to always enjoy it. I was in the group, I was in one of the groups yesterday with a bunch of the parents, Anthony and Barbara, and a bunch of other people were in that group. And it came up, completely just lost my train of thought. Wow. What was I going to say, Anthony? Do you know? Because it was such an amazing group. I'm so overwhelmed with how so. No. Okay. So here's what it was. I got it. Thank you. I think it was Stacy was in the group, and she was talking about. Where's Stacy? Is she here? Okay. Anyway, it doesn't matter. She was talking about like how challenging it could be sometimes, and how exhausting it seems to always like feel like you need to sort of be a fearless stutterer, and you need to stutter with confidence, and you need to do all this, and it's hard, right? And you're not always going to feel inside like, yeah, I'm just going out there and I'm doing this and I'm confident. It does take a lot of work, but one thing that Lee always said was, yeah, like I know, but in the long run it works out, right? And if you could a little more of the time try to approach stuttering instead of move back from stuttering, I guarantee you that it's going to help in the long run. And Lee was such an advocate for that. This organization is such an advocate for that. There's so many people in this room that are such advocates for that. And I'm meeting a bunch of people here this weekend. I'm happy and thrilled that so many people in this room are going to keep this message going. And yeah, I think that it's going to be very exciting. So thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about my story and myself. I'm happy to take any questions now that people have. Thanks. Thanks, Elizabeth.
I'd like to know, as a stutterer, what it's like to be an academic and to be working in the world of stuttering.
Do you remember, Elizabeth, us meeting a long time ago?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure, because we haven't spoken yet. And I was like, no, we definitely met, and we definitely talked in the past, and you did one of the Stutter Talk podcasts and things. What's it like to be in? Hi, and nice to see you. What is it like to be an academic? In stuttering, working on stuttering. I don't know. Like, do you mean in terms of like how people sort of react to stuttering, or just whether it's sort of difficult to be a person who's focused on stuttering 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and working with others to think about stuttering the way that you do, academically and research-wise. Does that work? Kind of?
Yeah, sure. It's fun as hell. I mean, I think stuttering is this remarkable, interesting thing that so many people are interested in knowing more about when we sort of open that door to making ourselves available to explain what stuttering is all about. And I love being a part of that process, you know, and especially with academics who are discerning and sort of critical in a lot of ways, and I think it's a fun challenge to have. And yeah, I mean, I love going to work every day and doing it.
Can I follow up with that?
Please.
So, I'm not an academic, I'm not an SLP, but I hear from some SLPs at school that they're not feeling the support to, and I'm speaking for SLPs, I'm not one, so speak up, you know, correct me please, edit me, that they don't feel the same support to bring in some of the thoughts that we work with here into the classes. And I wonder what it's like from the other side to watch that. And SLPs, you want to spread it out for me about, you know.
I guess I'll jump into
Please.
that. So I'm a speech language pathologist in a district actually in Colorado. There's we're pretty large district, we're a school district, so there's I think around like 40 speech language pathologists. I went to the conference last year and I took a lot of notes and I gave a presentation. Lee was supposed to join me. It was pretty emotional, and I informed the SLPs in my district of the teachings that I learned here. And I found it really interesting because I asked the speech language pathologist, like, who has heard of this affirming approach? And the ones who rose their hand were the ones who graduated in the last couple of years. And those SLPs said, I would actually feel uncomfortable not doing an affirming approach.
If that answers your question. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I am good. So I also stutter, and I'm in college to be a teacher. And I'm going to be starting student teaching in the fall. So on the first day of your class, do you advertise your stutter to the class?
So did everybody hear that question? Okay. Oh, do you want to? Yeah.
I just said that I'm in college to be a teacher, and I was asking him on his first day of class, does he advertise his stutter?
For a long, long time, I did. does everybody in this room know what advertising or self-disclosure is? In this group, I think a lot of people might. If you don't, it's when you tell your listener or your audience that you are a person who stutters. For me, it was one of the most helpful strategies that I used on my sort of journey to becoming accepting of myself as a person who stutters, and it always, for me, made it easier to talk to the group, without a doubt. It doesn't work for everybody. At the same time, I think that it can, right? And it's all how you approach it. If you feel comfortable and if you feel confident with the reason why you're doing it, then I think it's something that could be amazingly beneficial, especially in that particular context, right? And it's also kind of nice in that context because you have the floor, right? Which like sometimes makes things a bit easier. Yeah.
Hi, Eric. Thanks
Hi.
so much. Is it me? Is it my turn? So I want to sort of speak to the issue of speech pathologists working in the schools and their attitude or their approach. And so one of the things, I live in Iowa. I've lived there for a long time. I know a lot of speech pathologists in the schools there. And one of the things that is important to note is that, I think many of you know this, that school systems are very data-driven in terms of the resources that they provide, who qualifies for therapy. And it's really hard for them often to understand or affirm that not everything that can be measured matters, and not everything that matters can be measured. And the easiest thing to measure about stuttering is how many words are stuttered per minute's time, or in a sentence, or in X number of words. So in many cases in the schools, the measurement drives the goal. Does that make sense? And so it's up to all of us to show that there are things that are much more empowering to the well-being of the child in terms of therapy than how many words they stutter per minute's time. So we really need to understand the pressures that speech pathologists are under to achieve these goals. And the goals are there because they're easy to measure. I'm not saying that's the only motivation, but what are things that we can say as therapists that are as or more important, and we are the ones that need to articulate and decide and define how we know. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It's up to us. The administrators don't know. They want to know numbers. And that's really what drives a lot of what you see. Mm-hmm. So it's up to an organization like this, and parents, and academics in our classes to say, here's what's important, and if you want to convince the higher-ups that these are what we want to work toward, we are the ones who define what those are. Anyway, down from my soapbox.
Yeah, no, amen. Just quickly for the speech pathologists in the room, honestly, fluency should never be a goal. So I hear you. It's been like that. It is easier to measure overt stuttering than it is to measure other things. But because there is no way to directly target fluency, speech is a very complicated process. We know very little about how the brain processes speech. We know some, but generally speaking, we know very, very little. Because of that, fluency should never, ever be a goal. And okay, so then what do we do, really briefly, right? You can make all the good things quantifiable, right? How many times did you approach a situation instead of avoid? How many times did you switch a word instead of saying what it is that you want to say? How many times did you go up and speak to a new person? The administrators are not going, all they're going to want to see is some number. And you could turn all of those things into numbers. And I think that that's what we need to do.
That's right. We need to be the ones to give that message and show, because they're not going to do it on their own. They're happy with the way what the measures have always been. So that's what this organization can advocate for, is my point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I totally agree, because I work in the schools, and being a parent of a child who was a stutter, being a speech therapist, and seeing these goals would really make my blood boil. Like, I get so angry. And then I get upset, like I can't even articulate how I feel, because I'm just so angry. So I've searched like the internet looking for goals that were more positive and not fluency, and I've called Lee and try to get as many resources as I can. And what's hard is when these kids come in for me, the speech therapist prior wrote the goals, and we're supposed to meet those goals. So sometimes it's so hard to try to amend it. You want, like, I gotta like this goal, but sometimes they wouldn't let you amend it. So basically, I was like, I just ignore it. And I hate to say it, but I put down fake data, and I always remember this too. When you're a school speech therapist, the goals you have to report on are just a portion. We address so many other things. And that's what another therapist said to me. She's like, just ignore it. She's like, you know what you need to do, and you know as a person what you need as a therapist, especially being knowing about all this, how fluency is not really effective. Just try your best and do what you think, and seek out people, because you're not a specialist, and seek out specialists. And it's very hard to advocate. And I think as Ash showed, we need to put up goals or have something that's more effective. Because and a lot of therapists are very ignorant, and I don't mean to say that in a negative way, but they just don't know. And some people, when you try to address it with them now, they're just so cut and dry, they don't see it. Because they're so data driven. And it's like a re-education. And I think if you don't have it in your life, it's to them, some people are just like, oh, well, whatever, it's just this. And it's like, no, it's not just this, it's your whole being. And you can't, it's not something, and sometimes they'd say too, not they'd say, I want to address, it's not just stuttering, there's a lot of different things that people just make so black and white, and they don't address the whole person. And it's like, and communication difficulty affects you as a person, and not everybody gets that, whether it's a stutter or beyond that. And if you can't get your words out for whatever reason, or you can't communicate it, yeah, I think that whole piece is missing.
Yeah.
So, but I do agree with it, we do need, from therapists, we need to have more information to educate and to pull from. Because to me, some of the goals I see, they're still there. And I'm like, I can't do this. And it does cause some difficulties when you speak up, because I didn't have tenure, so I was like, oh, I can't speak up, I want to speak up, but I know you'll get let go. They will let you go. So now I have tenure, I'm like, screw this. Because this year is changing. And I did speak to a couple people, like, I can't do this anymore, we have to change. And thank God we have like 30 certain therapists, and some people are open to it, so I think we have leeway where I am now. But I've been in other districts, and we were just, maybe you have 5 in the whole district, you have no pull. And then you do have these other people that have no clue. So it is like, it has to change. It is all of us together, and education.
Yeah. I think it can be data-driven, though, like I was saying, and I think that is part of the speech pathologist's responsibility, right? It's just learning to do it in a different way, right? For some reason, there's this horrible sort of association, because it's been this way for so long, where data means fluency. It's not actually the case. I mean, like I was saying, the number of times you approach a situation, the number of times you don't avoid, right? The number of times that you go into a new situation, all of that is data, right? Yeah.
Hi. Over here on the
Who's
side
it?
on the right.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Hi, thanks.
Right next to it.
My name is Hayam. I'd like to just follow up with two points, maybe questions, observations. On your point, from what I've heard, like in the school system, speech and language pathologists will see many children, and only a small fraction of them will actually be kids who stutter. So the goal, the whole framework of setting goals has to be dramatically altered for that little subset. So it's kind of probably difficult. And the way school systems are structured, it's by township and by municipality. So kind of reorient, taking 1 or 2 SLPs in a school or a district and having them take 1, 2, 3, 4% of their caseload and having a whole different goal-setting structure for those two is really difficult. So like you're saying, I think it has to come from like ASHA, has to come maybe, like I have a friend who's an occupational therapist who's a curriculum special for occupational therapy. So maybe something along those lines in terms of writing a special curriculum for how for stuttering schools, not just quantifiable based on number of words per minute, but also functioning globally, might have like might land really well on like more of a national level. Something maybe to think about. My question really also is on a larger framework. I've heard some little movement of how insurance companies can maybe start covering speech language therapy, and I think it's a big problem that, especially because stuttering is different based on age groups and demographics, and when stuttering becomes expensive, you need money to access resources. There's many people who stutter can't access it, and when I hear like insurance companies won't cover it, they'll cover other therapies, they'll cover social work therapy sessions, up to 30 a year, I don't know. Speech stuttering therapy, it's like a big blank space, I don't know why. And for national, for that kind of pressure, you know, a national, you know, that, like, where is that? Is there ways, is there movement that you would be able to comment on where we are with that? And thanks a lot. It's been great. I really enjoy it. Thank you very much for presenting. It's very great.
Thanks. I appreciate the question. There are creative ways, I think, to get coverage, but it is a challenge. I can't really speak to it so much. I could talk about the ways to be creative, but it is a challenge, and it is a space in which we do need some people working on it, for sure. I do want to open the room up though to the kids in the room. I very much appreciated these questions. I'd rather hear from the kids if anybody wants to ask a question. Or like if you're like even if you're thinking about saying something, right? So there was somebody came up before in the open mic. Oh, was it Lexi? Maybe. Yeah. So you said something like, I thought it was so great. You were like, and I'm just giving you the preamble right now. I'm basically introducing Lexi right now. So she goes, yeah, like I don't really like have much to say, but she got up anyway, which I love, because this is such an amazing place to just take that opportunity to sort of work on ourselves a little bit, maybe, but to like face fears or just get up and talk and stutter. And I love that, and I hope that more people follow your lead. But please, what's your question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
My question was like, how did you learn to like accept like having a stutter?
So first you do this, and then, no. It's such a good question, and I love it. And I think there are lots of things that people can do. I think that it's just first what I'll say is that for me, it was realizing that it's not accepting stuttering so much, but it was more accepting myself as a person who stutters, right? Sometimes I know what I want to say, but my body sort of breaks down and I can't in that moment. So that was the first thing, right? In terms of like what I actually did, I took every opportunity that I had to put myself into situations that I knew were going to be uncomfortable and that I was afraid of. And like, you know, people say things like, okay, well, like, feel the fear and do it anyway. Feel the fear and do it anyway. That was really important to me. Like, touch the hot stove. Not literally, but like, jump in toes first. These horrible. But literally, that was my approach. You know, like, it wasn't like something that I like really like thought like, okay, well, this makes the most sense for me. It was, for me, a blunt force. Like, I'm just gonna find as many situations to put myself in as possible. And that's how I started to change how I think about stuttering, right? And I have to be honest with you, like, I, like everybody in this room, am still a work in progress. And there are times when I still don't want to stutter, right? But it's so much less than it was. And I think if we can find the courage to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations and know that we're doing the best that we can to try to help us and the best that we can to change our attitude, I think that that's one way to approach this thing. And it's not like a recipe, you know, it's like just doing this over and over again, and then eventually, I promise, it gets easier. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Like, out of a 1 to 10, what would you say that response was to that question? Really? 10, by the way. But thanks for the question.
Thank you for the answer.
So I just want to.
If you had any advice towards the teens and kids that stutter for trying to, what's the word, try to handle people who, I guess, judge poorly towards people, other people that are going through a stutter. What would you say to them?
I loved how you, when you would just stutter right there, you would keep looking at me. I thought that was so cool. This is an easy question. It's not an easy question. So there are lots of people out there, I think, who will inevitably judge, right? I think a lot of times, I think we think people might judge, and they're actually not judging. I think that I think finding other people, like finding people your age who stutter and talking about like when it seems like somebody is judging is something that can be so helpful and so empowering. It can give you more confidence even to say something if you want to in that situation, right? I was just working with a 5-year-old and like his mom sent me a bunch of video clips of him at home, right? Like, oh, like, this is what his speech looks like, whatever. And there was a point in the video where his dad like interrupted him. And the kid goes, "Dad, hold on, I wasn't done speaking right there." And I think like finding other people who maybe are in those same situation, maybe thinking about like finding ways to like speak up in those situations, as hard as it may seem, I think is going to be something in the long run that maybe makes you, us, whoever, feel a little bit better about ourselves in those kinds of situations. Does that make sense? It does? Are you sure? Okay, good. It was a kind of long-winded answer. I just wanted to make sure that it did. But thanks for the question.
Found out that stuttering is like a neurological condition, like last year. And you mentioned something about like different parts of your brain. I don't know if anyone really knows, but do you know like what happens in the brain when you stutter? Because that's something I'm actually really curious about.
Well, are you interested in a research internship? Are you in New York?
No, in Boston.
Oh, well, that's not so far. So, a lot of us are working on this question and this challenge. The brain is such a complicated place. We have some ideas of what is going on. To put it sort of very generally, is that a lot of the areas that are involved in speech and social cognition are not sort of sometimes are not talking to each other like how they would when we're not stuttering. But generally speaking, we're still trying to figure it out. So I love the question, and it's also something that can give you a whole career if you're interested. And if you are, definitely let's talk afterwards.
I actually did a school presentation about stuttering and learned that one part of the brain is going forward and the other part of the brain is going backwards when stuttering occurs. And I just, yeah.
But that was kind of mentioned like growing up in a time where yes, I mean I was like widely accepted. And one parent like there was kind of like a moment like a reaction where you felt like, okay, this could maybe some evolving. It's like kind of going like towards the direction like acceptance. I mean, like was fairly like long, but like whatever where you felt like that shit actually took place.
What's your name? Doug. I think right now, for you to ask a question, are you Gen Z or Gen Alpha? Which one?
I'm like,
We're actually kind of similar in this way. I'm the tail end of Gen X, so, and by 2 years. Okay. No, but I think right now, right, like the fact that you're asking a question of, oh, and it was framed so well, I realized that acceptance might be changing in public, right? And for you to be aware of the fact that that's the case, right? For people your age to be aware that that is the case, that does show me that, oh yeah, it really does seem like we are moving in the right direction. So I'm so happy to hear that, and thank you for that.